Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're stepping right behind the camera to uncover exactly how filmmakers manipulate our emotions. And to do it, we're using the universally heartbreaking true story of Hachikō the Akita. Now, you probably already know the legendary tale of his unwavering loyalty, but today, we aren't just recounting history. We're decoding the mechanical, cinematic choices that translate that raw story to the screen and make us feel it so deeply in our guts. So think about it. How exactly do filmmakers manufacture our tears? I mean, how does a director take a profoundly sad, true story and deliberately craft a cinematic masterpiece that makes you actually feel the physical weight of that tragedy? It doesn't just happen by accident, right? Achieving that level of connection requires incredibly specific, highly calculated choices. Before we yell action, let's quickly look at the raw narrative beats we're working with here. Hachikō was born in November 1923 and moved to Tokyo to live with Professor Uno. They build this beautiful routine together. Dog meets master at Shibuya Station every day. But then, the inciting incident hits. May 1925, Professor Uno unexpectedly passes away. From that day until March 1935, Hachikō faithfully waited at that exact station, a full decade of incredible hardship. Chronicling that staggering dedication, that is our primary cinematic goal. What's truly fascinating is that the science completely backs this up. Research by Neuromakama Diana Kashaka in the Research Inventions Journal points out that film techniques are highly intentional, calculated methods designed to guide audience perception, meaning every single tear you shed is guided by a director knowing exactly which psychological string to pull. You aren't just reacting to a sad dog, you are reacting to an invisible emotional framework built entirely around him. Kashika's research essentially breaks this framework down into three core cinematic pillars. First up, the visual elements, how the lighting, the color, and the composition frame the shot. Second, you've got auditory tools. Think swelling soundtracks and ambient diegetic sounds. And third, the narrative techniques, things like character arcs and non-linear storytelling. A great director seamlessly blends these three pillars together, wrapping you in an immersive world that provokes deep, almost involuntary emotional engagement. So here is the million-dollar filmmaking challenge. How do you visually depict the brutal, grueling passage of a decade without totally boring your audience? Hachikō waited for nearly 10 years. You can't just throw up a lazy title card that says 10 years later and expect a heavy emotional hit. According to George Davison Studios, utilizing the passing seasons thematically is actually one of the absolute most powerful ways to make the audience feel that time dragging on. Let's look at a stark visual comparison. We take the warm, idyllic summers of Hachikō's brief 15 months with Professor Ueno, and we crash them right into the harsh, biting winters of his decade-long wait. Summer is used to symbolize warmth and fleeting fun. It's a bright, saturated time mirroring his joy. But winter? Winter is framed as a dark, isolating wasteland. George Davison Studios hit the nail on the head here. They say, winter is the time when all aspects of nature go into a sort of hibernation. And this brilliantly illustrates the silent suffering of an aging Akita. Because despite battling real documented ailments like heartworm and standing in sub-zero snow, Hachikō refuses to hibernate. Day in and day out, he makes his commute to the station. His dedication feels all the more devastating when it's set against that stark, freezing white backdrop. Now, you might think spring would offer some visual relief, right? Actually, scratch that. A clever director uses it for maximum heartbreak. Spring represents rebirth. But by placing a grieving, exhausted dog right in the middle of a lush, blossoming world, you create this incredibly bitter contrast. You're showing how completely out of place he is. The rest of the world is moving on. It's coming back to life. But Hachikō? He is firmly stuck in his grief. Okay, let's step off the set and into post-production. Researchers Munjavarkar and Kanij highlight the absolute powerhouse that is color grading, which is essentially the artistic manipulation of a film's color palette. In the editing room, we dramatically shift those warm, nostalgic, golden tones of Hachikō's past, completely stripping them away to leave only the cold, stark blues and grays of his present reality out on the streets. Let's stay in the editing bay for a second and see how this builds up to the climax, the moment we show the audience Hachikō's cherished memories. Right in the middle of those harsh, cold-graded winters, we flash back to the happy summers to just twist the emotional knife a little bit more. To do that seamlessly, we rely on a very specific recipe of visual effects. We don't need to get totally bogged down in the software UI, but these 4 specific steps in Premiere Pro are literally the recipe for crafting that powerful, dreamy bridge directly into the dog's mind. You start with a simple cross dissolve to bridge the two timelines. Then, tossing on an adjustment layer with an animated Gaussian blur kind of softens the edges of reality. By tweaking the opacity with linear dodge blending, you blow out the highlights, which creates that glowing, ethereal look. Finally, you hit it with a turbulent displace effect. That last step, absolutely crucial. Turbulent displace is a visual effect that distorts an image to create a wavy, unpredictable visual. But in the context of this story, it does so much more. It is the secret ingredient that truly sells the memory. It perfectly mimics the hazy, dreamlike quality of a moment that happened almost 10 years ago, making the audience tangibly feel the agonizing distance between the dog's sad reality and his treasured past. So, bringing it all together, let's loop back to Hachikō's research. Every cinematic technique is an intentional and often calculated method. Ultimately, the magic of the Hachikō film isn't just relying on the sad facts of his 10-year wait. The real magic is in how a filmmaker brilliantly combines things like Gaussian blurs, turbulent displacements, and dramatic seasonal shifts to intentionally manufacture your emotional response. So I'm going to leave you with this to chew on. The next time you find yourself tearing up at a movie, what invisible techniques pulled your heartstrings? The next time you watch a film, I really challenge you to look past the tears. Try to spot the calculated visual, auditory, and narrative tools that are secretly shaping your emotions. Because once you see the mechanics humming behind the screen, you gain a whole new appreciation for the storytelling. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep your eyes wide open next time you head to the movies.